Hello friends, if you're watching this video, it's because you're curious on how to use the vector layer properties and tools available in, our Lord and Savior Clip Studio Paint. Either that, or you're one of Teddy's acquaintances, art friends, or one of my enemies who wants to learn more about vector layers, and I'm the vector layer god, but I've already explained this upwards of 15 times, so I'm making this catch-all YouTube video for those who are curious on how to use these lads. So, first things first, Teddy, what is a vector layer? So a vector layer is, for reasons, it's special for reasons that we'll get into later, is this little icon right here, the layer button with the cube in it. That's the vector layer to open a new vector layer. And this one to the left is a raster layer, aka the boring one. And we're going to talk about why it's the boring one. But Teddy, how do I know the difference between a vector or a raster? How do I tell if I've opened either or? And the way that you can do that, the way that you can tell, is when you first open a new layer, it's going to say layer 1, layer 2. But if you look beside the layer, it'll have a little icon beside it, and this icon, the cube within the frame, that's a vector layer. Okay? So that's the difference between the two. And take good note, when you merge a vector into a raster, or a raster into a vector layer, you lose your vector information. Okay? So once you merge a vector into a raster, Clip Studio Paint loses all of its vector information, and you won't be able to do any of the cool stuff that I'm about to show you. So if you keep looking over there in my layers, right here on the right, I'm going to merge this vector layer into this raster, and then it turns into a raster layer. And vice versa, if I do raster into vector, it's no longer a vector layer. However, if you merge vector into vector, it stays vector. It keeps its vector properties and it keeps that information. So when in doubt, try not to merge your vector layers into your raster layers until you're sure you don't need vector information anymore. So I don't need these. And now we're going to talk about vector versus raster and why they're so cool. So this is my blue raster layer, and this is my red vector layer. And we're going to talk about the red vector layer and why it's cool. This is kind of blinding me. I'm going to change the background color. Okay. So starting with my red vector layer, we're going to go through this little button down here. If your Clip Studio Paint is the same as mine, factory, everything's in the same, the button should be down here, right by your color. It's going to be called Control Point, Pinch Vector, Simplify Vector. It's going to be named something in this folder with the same icon. So we're going to go through these cool features, starting with Control Point. Now, Control Point is when I hover over with Control Point, it shows me all of the points in that line. So every time that your line curves or changes direction or has an arc, it's gonna put a control point there. So like if you look at my persona here's fluff, it's a really complicated line with a lot of control points, versus this ear doesn't curve a lot. It's not very complicated. It doesn't have a lot of control points. Similarly to these lines right here and these ones. However, if I do the same thing with my raster layer, I hover over it with control point, it doesn't do anything because Clip Studio Paint does not save control point information on raster layers. And we'll get more into why that's bad for raster layers. So with control point equipped, what you can do is grab any of these control points and change them. So for whatever reason you want to change the shape of your line, you can go like that. You can alter them in whatever ways that you like so. If you want lines to be longer, shorter, or for whatever tools you can use control point. Pinch vector line is my favorite because I'm sure if you've been drawing for more than 20 minutes on any art program, you have experienced trying to draw the perfect line an awful lot. So with pinch vector line over here, all you need to do is equip, you know, your lad. Equip Studio Paint, please. Now's not the time to save. So I have pinch vector line equipped, and I have a really high pinch level. And what that means is that I can grab this line and then drag it, okay? So I'm gonna try to make these look like they're one line. Kinda close enough, like so. But you can grab your lines and you can move them into whatever shape that you like, whatever shape that you need. So if you're off by a tiny bit, you can just grab the line and move it. Like said, this doesn't work on raster layers, only with vectors. And if you lower the pinch level, it just doesn't grab as much of the line. See? Like this. Next up is simplify vector line. Simplify vector line, what it does, depending on how much you're simplifying, all you have to do is hover over an entire line and it takes away control points. It makes it simple. So if I look at these lines here, they're really overly simplified to their most basic shape. If I go back to simplify vector line and simplify them, just only a little bit, there aren't as many control points as there was before. So, and next up is connecting vector line. Connecting vector lines doesn't have too much of a use. However, if you have two lines that for whatever reason, you want them to become one line, like, I suppose I'll give that a go. What you're gonna do is select connect vector line. You're going to hover over both of the lines. And then if I check it with control point, those are now, those two lines from before, as you can see, are now one line. And then redraw vector line is a little bit similar to pinch vector line, but like said, if you want to alter your line just a little bit, all you're gonna do is have redraw vector line selected and then redraw the line. So it keeps the width, it keeps the general shape and the length of the line, but if you want to push it just a little bit for whatever, you can do that. And redraw vector line width, not very useful. Instead, what I use is correct line width, and correct line width is exactly what it sounds like. I have narrow over here selected, and I'm going to narrow my lines by 3 pixels. Actually, we'll make it 5 pixels just so that it's very obvious. If you're a cartoony art style artist, this is great for you, so you can mess around with the width of your lines. And whatever you select with this tool, it will thin out, it will narrow the line by the number of pixels that you selected it as. So like said right here, if I do it, it narrows these lines. Same thing with thicken. If I select thicken and hover over these lines, it'll get much bigger by the number of pixels that, you know, you selected to make wider. Like, perfect. So yeah, like said, those are the cool tools that vector layers can do. The last one that I'm going to show you before I get into resizing and why resizing is happy for vector layers is erasing. Now, if you've ever drawn hair or thin things, or just done a drawing where there's a lot of intersecting lines, you've probably had this happen before, where you, like, I'm gonna try to get rid of this paw so that there's, hello Spotify ad, I want to get rid of these lines right here, so, you know, it looks like the claws are over the paw, but it's a pretty hard thing to do. It's very difficult to get rid of lines sometimes, and it doesn't look very good. And I'm lazy. So what I do is when there's intersecting lines that I don't want, you go to your vector layer, you go to your eraser tool, and this little box right here, vector eraser, you want to make sure that that is checked and your settings are on erase up to intersection. And basically just what that is that it's going to erase until it meets, it's going to erase your vector line until it intersects with another vector line. This applies even if the vectors are on different layers, the same thing is going to apply. It's going to erase until it intersects with another vector line. Why is Clip Studio Paint lagging? So I'm going to do the exact same thing that I tried with my raster layer over here that requires too much effort, and I'm going to delete this little paw. And as you can see, it's not very... So with the eraser selected, you can get rid of all the in-betweens. Like said, it erases the lines until it meets another vector line. So yeah, cool. That's another great feature. And now we're going to talk about resizing and transforming. So I'm going to select both my vector and my raster layers. Is Spotify done playing ads? It is. So with both of them selected, I'm going to transform my pictures. I want to do whatever I want with them. You know, I need to transform them, make it bigger, make them smaller, stuff like that. So when you transform vector layers, it still maintains the quality of when you first drew it. So as you can zoom in however much you like, and it's still high quality, as opposed to raster layers, they get that weird, awkward fuzz. Like if you compress a JPEG and then blow it up, it'll get this weird fuzz around it. And to further show you the way that works, I'm going to make both of the layers really, really small. And then I'm going to enlarge them again. Okay, so as you can see, after lowering the size of a raster layer, it dramatically loses its quality, as opposed to a vector layer that looks exactly the same. It looks exactly as it did when you first drew it. Which is pretty great. So generally speaking, when you're doing your line art, you want to do it in vector layers because you're going to do a lot of, like, if you're like me, you do a lot of resizing and you don't want to lose your quality when that happens, right? Furthermore, you can merge vectors into vectors. Something that I like to do is I have, you know, my full line art, this one right here, my full line art vector layer, and then I have the vector layer that I'm currently working on. And what that means is that when I start drawing stuff, like I'm gonna do this sword here, just for pretend. These are in 2 different layers, but I also don't want the sword going through his face, so I can erase like this. So you see how even though these vector lines are in different layers, the properties still work, right? Erase everything. Yeah, like I said, you get the picture. And if you want, you can still transform, you know, the one vector layer, and when you merge them, it keeps the vector layer properties. So, yeah, cool stuff. That's the basics of using vector layers and why they're pretty great. Don't forget to like and subscribe and everything. This video is not edited. I hope this helps you. So yeah, thank you. If you have any more questions, feel free to bother me or comment or do whatever. yeah, thanks for watching.